Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you joining us today in today's live lecture coming to you from Nkolomahadum Wisdom University. Today's date is Oye Market Day in the Igbo lunar calendar and 2/10, 2026 in the Roman Catholic calendar. Remember, at Nkolomahadum, we always advise you to use your naturally given common sense, which we call Akonuche in Igbo language. Also, because we are Igbo-centric, Biafran-centric, and African-centric, we always advise you to see things from how it concerns you, not how it concerns other cultures. And we want you to join us because we are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, and we are live on Twitter. And we also want you to like, comment, and share. The title of today's lecture is to address the ancestral cause. When you hear our people talking about ancestral cause, we want to address that today. In the title, Ancestral Cause, Europeans and African ancestors who committed more atrocities in the world. The title of today's lecture is to let our people know, because we realize that many don't know. So we want to know, is it the European ancestors or the African ancestors that committed more atrocities in the world that we live in? That is the title of our lecture. And we want to let you know that often, our people often say that our ancestors, the African ancestors, have ancestral cause, that the ancestors cause something that is affecting them, okay? Something like the way we worship, the way our ancestors worship with images, but the same way the Europeans also worship with images today. If you go to the churches, you see the images there. The way our people, carry out their daily life in form of how they worship their supposedly God. Many thought that it is not good, that is ancestral, behavior that is affecting them. And that is why we decided to present this lecture today, to go through some of the activities of the European ancestors and see what they have done. And then you compare that with whatever ancestral behavior of the Africans, comparing the ancestral behavior of Africans to the ancestral behavior of the Europeans. And the genesis of the ancestral behavior of the Europeans started with the Papal Bull. The Papal Bull of the 15th century, particularly the doctrine of discovery, were Papal decrees which authorized Christian European powers, that is, Christian European nations, to seize non-Christian lands, to go and seize non-Christian lands. This was in the 15th century. Enslave inhabitants, to seize their land, to enslave them, and monopolize trade. The Papal Bull, which was signed by Pope Nicholas V, authorizing Portugal to go out of European land, to go to other countries, like African countries and other places in the world, to go there and seize the lands of the people by force, to attack, to conquer, and enslave Saracens and pagans, especially in Africa. That is the genesis of the world we live today. And that is the ancestral behavior. That was what the ancestors of the Europeans did. They, through the church, through the Catholic Church, they authorized their people to leave their land, to go to other people's land, to go there and seize their land by force, and to enslave them, to attack them, to conquer them. That's what their ancestors did. And the Europeans did just that. They started to go across the whole world to conquer people, to attack them, to take their land, and enslave them. Which one is bigger? These actions by the European ancestors, compare it to the African ancestors. Did the African ancestors do something like that? The answer is no. And this action by the European ancestors shaped the world we live today. Because from here, you get into slavery. From there, I get into colonization. From there, I get into neocolonization. From there, I get to partition of Africa and what we have today. So any African saying there's an ancestral cause in Africa, the person is either miseducated or misinformed or ignorant. And so that is why we are presenting this lecture. Because after the Europeans moved out now to other lands, they conquer the lands, take the land by force, start to enslave people. And then during the slavery, it is estimated that 1.2 to 2.4 million Africans died during the slavery, during the passage, during the movement from Africa to Europe or to Brazil. During the movement of people from Africa to America or to Europe or to Brazil, the new land, about 1.2 to 2.4 million Africans died. What other ancestral behavior can lead to killing 1.2 to 2.4 million Africans? Because often our people will argue that, some people say that our ancestors were killing twins. Let's assume that it is true. Even if they are killing twins based on their own culture. Based on their own culture, right? Even though it's not true. But assuming it is true. But how many twins did they kill to amount to 1.2 to 2.4 million that died during the transatlantic slave trade? And they died during the Middle Passage journey. Millions more died during capture, inland transportation to the coast, and in Caribbean seasoning camps. So apart from this, millions also died during capture when they are trying to capture them as slaves. Many also died during transportation from the inland to the coast. And in Caribbean seasoning camps, the camps where they keep them. So many died during capture. Many died during transportation. And many died in the camps. Overall, roughly 12.5 million people were embarked with 14% death rate during the crossing. Out of all this, about 12.something million Africans were moved out of Africa to America or to Europe or to the New World, Brazil, and others, out of which 14% of them died. So how will an African wake up tomorrow and be saying that there's an ancestral cause in Africa? Cost of how many lives? How many lives did they cost? You see, that is why we wanted to present this lecture to you, for you to know that anybody, any African, saying that there's an ancestral cause holding him or her is either ignorant, misinformed, living out of poverty, and living in darkness. It is. Now, as soon as slavery, remember, during the slavery, they chain people. They chain people. They use iron to mark their body. And they are selling human beings. And all the churches benefited from slavery. Both the Catholic Church, both the Baptist Church, both the Anglican Church, all the churches, you know it, all of them were buying and selling slaves, selling human beings, like you and I, making money from human beings. And most of the riches you see abroad, you see like in Europe or America or, you know, any of these European countries, most of the wealth you see there was created out of slavery, from slave trade and slave labor. They made a lot of money. Most of the things you are seeing today in European countries like America or Britain or France or Germany or Spain were from selling human beings and using human beings as labor. All of them were profiting from that slavery, selling fellow human beings, selling fellow human beings. What other atrocity is greater than that? When you are talking that you have ancestral cause in Africa. Does it make sense to you? And now, during colonization of Africa by European powers between 1880 to 1960 fundamentally reordered the continent. It changed the African continent during colonization because negative impacts that persist today. The colonization, the time the Europeans now come to Africa by themselves to rule us in Africa, between 1800 to 1960, when they start to give Africans flag independence, it fundamentally reordered the continent. It changed the continent, creating lasting negative impacts that persist today. What they did during colonization created negative impacts that continue till today. So any African child saying that the ancestral cause does not know that it is colonization, that it is negative of colonization that is affecting him or her, and not an African ancestral cause, but European ancestral cause. What the Europeans did, it is what is affecting all of us. But many doesn't know, and many do not want to point finger to the Europeans probably because they are going to their church. They believe in their Bible and Jesus and others. And so this colonization involved the violent exploitation of resources and labor. When they came to rule us, they used violent exploitation of resources and labor, arbitrary division of land without regard to ethnic, linguistic, or cultural line. Arbitrary division of land. That is why you see like a Biafran in Nigeria. That's why you see all this partition of Africa, where you wake up the next morning, you and your brother, you are in different countries. They divided Africa without regard to ethnic, linguistic, or cultural lines. That is the genesis of the problem that we are having in Africa. And that is from the European ancestral cause. It's not from an African ancestral cause. Because they are the one that change whom we are to what we are not. That is why this lecture is very important. that you share it to your loved ones for them to understand the reality. Because this type of lectures are not being taught to you. Nobody will teach you this. Nobody will let you know this. They just continue to lie to you, and you're believing in those lies and brainwashing. Now, apart from after they are done with colonization and then handed over power to our brothers, that is called neocolonialism. Neocolonialism in Africa manifests as continued foreign control. You see, neocolonialism manifests as continued foreign control over African nations through economic, political, and cultural mechanisms, replacing direct colonial rule with indirect influence. You see now, you are following their economic programs. You are following their political programs. They are imposing their culture on you. All those are indirect way of ruling you. That's what it means. They put all these economic things and forcing you to follow their economic system, forcing you to practice their political system, just like the democracy that most African countries are practicing. They impose their culture on you, and so they control you with all those mechanisms, in addition to the fact that they will put in puppets who will be doing what they want. That is called neocolonialism. So we Africans, because of ignorance, because we don't know, that is why some of us, we open our mouth and be saying that we have an African ancestral cause. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. The ancestral cause that we have is the European ancestral causes. What the ancestors of the Europeans have done that is affecting us up to today. That is the ancestral cause you should be talking about, and not the African ancestral cause. That is what we want you to know in this lecture. And the key effects of neocolonialism include entrenched economic dependency. They make you to depend on them economically. Exploitation of natural resources by multinational corporations. Unsustainable debt. Political instability and cultural erosion. What this means is that they use their economic system to control you. And from there, they will be exploiting your natural resources by their companies, the multinational corporation, their companies. And then they give you loan to make sure that you have enough loan. With that loan, they will be using that loan to control what you are doing. And then political instability, make sure that you're not stable by the way that they put you together, like the way they put the Nigerians together with different nations in it, so they can never be stable. And then cultural erosion, when you leave your culture and you are following the foreign colonial culture. That's neocolonialism at play. But you will be there shouting and saying, you have new things coming. You have new things coming. You don't know that those things you call new things are foreign things coming to be used to control you, to be controlling you. You know? And these are what is being implanted and sustained by the European ancestors, not African ancestors. Now, we also want to use this lecture to let you know that why slavery was going on, why colonization was going on, why neocolonialism was going on, that Europeans have been fighting wars in Europe. They have been fighting a lot of wars. There are 5 major global conflicts often cited for their massive scale and impact. World War I is European War. World War II is European War. The Napoleonic Wars, the Cold War, and the Taiping Rebellion These are some of the wars that have been going on in Europe. They've been fighting themselves, where they were even doing slavery during that slavery period, because slavery lasted from 15th century to almost 20th century. So within that 500 years, 15 to 20 is 500 years, they were fighting a lot of wars in their land. And those wars cost a lot of life, killing people in their land. Also, if an America with the US often listing its 5 declared wars: War of 1912, the wars the Americans fought, the wars of 1912, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, in addition to World War I and II. All these wars reshaped global power. So the Europeans have been fighting wars. They've been fighting each other, killing each other for a very, very long time. So their life can be summarized as life of wars. And you can see the wars continuing in our lifetime. So they've been fighting wars. And apart from these 5 major global conflicts, they also fought what they call 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was a far-reaching conflict between European powers that lasted from 1756 to 1763. 7 Years' War. And that war was between France, Austria, Saxony, Sweden, and Russia were aligned on one side. And they fought Prussia, Hanover, and Great Britain on the other side. It lasted for 7 years, from 1756 to 1763. So the ancestors of the Europeans have been fighting a lot of wars, even among themselves. Even among themselves. Then there's another major war, the war that gave Netherlands independence. The primary war for Netherlands independence was the 80 Years' War. They fought another 80 Years' War for Netherlands to be independent from 1568 to 1648, also known as the Dutch Revolt, where the northern provinces fought to separate from Spanish Habsburg rule, led by figures like William the Silent. This conflict culminated in the 1948 Peace of Westphalia. So the European ancestors have been fighting a lot of wars. A lot of wars. You can see this one lasted for 80 years. 80 years. So after this lecture, any African will stop to say you have ancestral cause. Africans don't have ancestral cause. We are suffering from the ancestral causes, ancestral things done by European ancestors on our people. That's what we are suffering from. That's what you should know. And even after that 80 Years' War that gave Netherlands independence, there's another 30 years of war. This one was fought primarily in Central Europe between 1618 and 1648. Was one of the most destructive conflicts in Europe history, and estimated 4.5 to 8 million soldiers and civilians died from the effects of battle, famine, or disease, which parts of Germany reporting population decline of over 50% after that war. So after the 80-year war, they also fought another 30 years war. So the ancestors of the Europeans have been fighting wars. And their wars also get to Africa. That's why you see the partition of Africa. That's why you see colonization, neocolonization, and what we have today. So it is the activities, it is what the ancestors of the Europeans that have done, that has placed us, that has placed Africans in the condition that we are today. Because they never leave us alone. And do you know, even after that 30 years war, there's another war. There's a 100-year war they are fighting in Africa, in South Africa. They fought another 100-year war, a war that lasted for 100 years in South Africa, which is referred to the Xhosa Wars of Cape Frontier Wars. It is called Xhosa Wars or Cape Frontier Wars, which is a series of 9 brutal conflicts between 1779 and 1879, fought in the Eastern Cape. The Xhosa Kingdom resisted expansion by Dutch and later the British. So the South Africans, we have fought the Dutch, this Netherlands now, that fought 80 years war to gain independence, came down to Africa, to Africa again, and started to fight another 100 years war. After the South Africans fought with the Dutch, after that war is about to end, Britain joined the way again, and they lasted for 100 good years in South Africa, in our own land in South Africa. Why are they coming to Africa to fight us, to take our land, to take our resources, to, control us? Why? And our people, because of the fact that we are not taught the right thing, we are not taught the right thing. These are the things that are supposed to be taught in our schools. These are the things that our children are supposed to be taught from kindergarten to grow up with, so that they know what the world that they are entering into. But nobody will teach you this. Rather, they will bring the Bible and tell you that Bible will do this for you, that Jesus did that. That's what they'll be telling you. They will not tell you the fundamental. Why did the Europeans came to Africa? Why should the Europeans fight 100-year war in South Africa, to conquer South Africa, to conquer their land? Why should it be so? They are not teaching you that. That's why you should subscribe to Nkola Mohad Wisdom University. Because this is where we teach you what you're supposed to know. Nobody is teaching you anywhere, in any school, in Africa. Nobody. So they fought this 100-year war with South Africans. Why? Why should they come to leave their land to our land? And apart from that, and that war gave the Britain control of most of the South African lands. That is why when you go to South Africa today, you see a lot of white people there. They came there by force. They took the land by force. That's what they will not teach you. And then, don't forget, the scramble for Africa was also war. They came with war to fight for the whole land of Africa. It's called the Scramble for Africa, 1881 to 1914. Was the rapid invasion. It was an invasion, partition, and colonization of Africa by 7 European powers. Why should it be so? Why should they leave their land to come to our land to kill us, to take our land, to partition it, to take it by force? The European powers that came to Africa to partition our land, to invade our land, are Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. And they were driven by industrial demand for resources. They want resources. And they came to Africa by force to invade our land. And they took it. That is why we are in the condition we are today. So for any African waking up tomorrow and saying there's ancestral cause, this is your ancestral cause. what the Europeans did to you, the condition the Europeans kept us, is what we are suffering today. It's what we are suffering today. And so, remember, they eventually partitioned Africa, formalized the partition by 1884 to 1885 Berlin Conference. This period involved brutal military conquest against African resistance. Brutal military conquest. They brutally conquered Africa, came with gun, killing our people, and later intense competition between Europeans. So they organized themselves militarily and came to Africa to take over the whole land of Africa. And it ended with where the Europeans nearly start killing themselves in Africa, and then they went to Berlin and placed the map of Africa and divided Africa to themselves, took the land of Africa by force. That is the European ancestral cause that have kept Africa poor, that have kept you ignorant, that have kept you in darkness. That is what you wouldn't know. That is what you wouldn't learn from any other place, except from Color Mahadum Wisdom University. That is the problem we have. Now, even after Britain have gotten the portion called Nigeria today from that partition of Africa, Britain also started to fight wars within Nigeria. British colonial wars in Nigeria, approximately between 1880s and 1918, involved military campaigns. Britain involved military campaigns in Nigeria to establish control, secure trade routes for resources like palm oil, and suppress local resistance. They are suppressing local resistance. Whatever our people do to overcome them, they keep suppressing them to put them down. These are the problems that we have. That is the genesis of the situation of an Igbo man, of a Biafran, of an African today. What the European ancestors did to us. So we don't have any ancestral cause. We didn't go to anybody's land to take their land, to take their resources by force, to control their trade routes. No, they came to our land. And they are still in control of those lands today. Those are the real ancestral cause that is affecting all of us. That is where all of us should be pointing to, and not pointing to ourselves. And then, don't forget, Britain also fought the Aro War. The Arochukwu people in Biafra land, they fought them. Initiated by the British to dismantle the Aro Confederacy in eastern Nigeria, aiming to end their control over trade and slave trade. The trade routes being controlled by Aro people. The British fought them to take control of that trade route in our own land, and defeated them in our own land, and burned down the Arochukwu Shrine. They burned them down in our land. Also, they fought the Benin Empire. They destroyed the Benin Empire in our own land. Those are the ancestral causes that we are suffering from. That's what we Africans should know. That's where we Africans should be pointing to, and not pointing to ourselves. And if you're an African and you are still saying that you have ancestral cause, it is because you are either miseducated or misinformed, or you have been brainwashed. You allow somebody to brainwash you, to tell you that somebody that caused your problem is not the person, that you are the one that caused your own problem. Often you hear so many Africans saying that, yes, we also caused the the problem. We participated in slavery. Africans did this, Africans did that. But you hear what they're saying? Military campaign. The Britain, the Europeans, they carried out military campaign. Our people resisted them as much as we can because we don't have that kind of, we don't have the same type of ammunition and military power that they had at that time. We try to resist them as much as we can, but they with their military power, they have more military power because they've been fighting wars in Europe for so many years. They've been fighting wars in their land. But we are not. We don't have superior weapons like they did, like they do. That was why they were able to suppress our people and conquer our people. That is the real ancestral cause that we are suffering from, not pointing to our fathers, the way they worship their God or the way they live their life based on their culture. They never take anybody's land. They never went to kill anybody. But these Europeans, in their quest for resources and control, left their land to our land to kill us, to take our land, to take our resources, to put us where we are today.
Unknown 9 or pokey.
That is the situation. And so, if you are still saying that you have ancestral cause, maybe it's because you are poor, you don't have information. And in this 21st century, if you don't have information, then you blame yourself, but not actually, because you see the system that we have in Africa, the colonial masters, what they are still teaching our people is to present them as saviors. So that's why you see a village woman in a village in Biafra land or in Igbo land in Africa, he'll be saying that he has ancestral cause. He'll be saying that Jesus is the one that is doing something for him or her. You know, which is not true, which is from brainwashing and ignorance and still living in the darkness. When you are talking like that, when you are reasoning like that, you are still living in darkness and ignorance. And you don't know that the government we have right now in Africa is the colonial government. All their structure, this structure of local government, the structure of states and country are created by the colonial masters. They're serving the colonial objective. Because in this system that we have now, they concentrated resources and power with few people who are answerable to them. It wasn't like that in those days before the arrival of the Europeans to our land. Your land and resources is owned by you, your family. It's owned by the village. It's owned by the community. It's owned by the town. But now, resources are concentrated in the hand of the government. Structure created by the colonial masters. And so, the government is supposed to solve most of your problem. Give you good education. Make sure you have good welfare system. Make sure that you are feeding. Make sure you have light. Make sure you have transportation. Make sure you have good roads. Make sure you have good hospitals. And so many things. It's the government. And not your ancestors. Don't be pointing to your ancestors. Instead of pointing to your own ancestors, point to the real people, the European ancestors that committed more atrocities across the world, to the point that they left their land to your land, to take it by force, to enslave you, to control your resources and your trade routes in your land by force. That is where you should be pointing your finger to. Very, very, very important that we point the finger at the right place. So, as from today, any African you hear saying he has ancestral cause from his family or from the community, please tell that person that he or she is mistaken, that he or she is ignorant, he or she has been brainwashed, He or she has been miseducated and misinformed. He or she is still in darkness, doesn't know the reality. Because what they're supposed to be teaching our people, they're not teaching our people what they're supposed to teach them. They're not teaching them what they're supposed to teach them. They're supposed to teach them about ourselves, about how we got to where we are, about what the European ancestors did to us, and their children are still doing it to us till today. If you want to have the correct education, that is the correct education. These are the problems that we are having today. And so, also, if you are busy talking about your African ancestral cause, it means you also don't have any job. You don't have any job to do. You don't have any information, accurate information. You have misinformation and miseducation. So what we have tried to achieve in this lecture today, of which the title is the ancestral cause. Each time you hear an African saying ancestral cause, and we are asking, European and African ancestor who committed more atrocity in the world. And from what we have presented so far, you can tell that the European ancestors have committed more atrocities in the world. And the atrocities affected us. What they did to us is what is affecting us. From Papa Bull, where the Pope Nicholas V, authorized Europeans to go and take the lands of non-Christians, enslave them, kill them, monopolize all the trade routes, and they start doing that. That's the beginning. And all those things lead to slavery. And in slavery, about 1.2 to 2.4 million Africans died during the Middle Passage journey. And many died during capture, inland transportation, and seasoning camps, in the camps where they are keeping them. And overall, about 12.5 million Africans were shipped from Africa to either Europe, America, or Brazil, because Brazil has the greatest share of the slave trade. And out of these 12.5 million people, about 14% of them died. And after that, they started colonization. They came on the ground to colonize us, to rule us. It was during this colonization that they imposed their system on us, their religion, their education, their culture. They started to impose it on us. And it lasted between 1800 to 1960, creating lasting negative impacts that persist today. It involved violent exploitation of resources and labor, arbitrary division of land without regard for ethnic, linguistic, or cultural lines. They manage the land, they divide the land, irrespective of your culture, irrespective of your language or cultural ties. That is the problem we are having today. You can take the case of Nigeria, where so many nations were put together. The Igbo race is there, the Yoruba race is there, the Hausa race is there, the Fulani came, the Middle Belt is there, and so many other minorities. You just put everybody together there. That is the genesis of our problem. And that is caused from European ancestors, not African ancestors. And then from there to neocolonialism. Neocolonialism now is where they put our people there. They put our people there and then introducing their cultural system, their economic system, their political system, they put it on us. Their religious system. Everything that they're doing, they impose it on our people. From colonialism to neocolonialism. The difference now is that it is our people that is imposing those things on our people. It is our own people. You don't see a white man as the president or as your governor. No, it is people that look like me and you who is following Western culture, whom they are directing what to do. Two. Those are the European ancestral causes in our land. And the key effects of neocolonialism includes economic dependency. They make you to be economically dependent on them. Exploitation of natural resources by a multinational corporation. They use their companies now to be exploiting you. And they give you loans on sustainable debt. They put you into debt so you can use it to be dependent on them. Political instability. When you put people of different culture together, you will have political instability, just like we're having in Nigeria. And cultural erosion. You are following their culture. Whatever they are telling you, you are doing. Those are the main problems we have in our land from European ancestral behaviors. And then we use this lecture to let you know that Europeans have been fighting wars. They have been fighting themselves from that 15th century to the 20th century. They have been fighting themselves, even up to 21st century. The war you see going on in Ukraine is part of that fighting each other. They've been fighting each other. And we told you about the 5 major global conflicts often cited for the massive scale and impact. World War I, World War II, the Napoleonic Wars, the Cold War, the Taiping Rebellion. And if you Americans will count it, Americans will count the War of 1912, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, in addition to World War I and World War II. You see, it's all about wars. And all these wars reshaped global power. They use this war to control the world we live in. You know? And so, remember, Cold War created bipolar world, and the Taiping Rebellion was one of the history's deadliest internal conflicts. So these people have been fighting wars. They also fought the 7 Years' War, which was a far-reaching conflict between European powers that lasted from 1756 to 1763, where France, Austria, Saxony, Sweden, and Russia were aligned on one side, and they fought against Prussia, Hanover, Great Britain on the other side. It lasted for 7 years. Between 1756 and 1763, remember, slave trade is still going on then. So they were fighting each other, killing themselves. Also, they had this, the Dutch War of Independence. For the Dutch, Netherlands to be independent, they fought an 80-year war, 80-year war among themselves. You know, that war is between actually the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. They fought for 80 years. And then the Catholic Church and Protestant Church also fought for another 30 years. That's 110 years they fought. And that all those wars between 1618 and 1648 led to the Peace of Westphalia. But the 30-year-old war killed about 4.5 to 8 million people, including soldiers and civilians in Europe. So they've been fighting themselves. So how will you now classify these European ancestors and what their children are doing today? How will you classify them? In addition, they came to South Africa and fought for 100 years. The South Africans fought with the Dutch, and when it's about to end, Britain came in. They fought with the Dutch and Britain for 100 years in South Africa. That was how they defeated the South Africans and took care of their land. That's why you go to South Africa today, 70% of their land is occupied by Britain and the Europeans. These are the real problem that we have in Africa. These are the ancestral cause and not ancestral cause from a fellow African or our ancestors. And then after that, remember the scramble for Africa. They now come for the whole Africa. between 1881 and 1914 was the rapid invasion. It was an invasion. They invaded the whole of Africa to partition and colonize Africa by 7 European powers: Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. They were coming because of industrial demand for resources. They want resources, and then they left their land to take it by force in our land. You know, driven by resources, then they now formalize that conquest, that military conquest against Africa in Berlin, Germany, between 1884 and 1885, where they shared Africa to themselves. That was how Britain got this portion called Nigeria today. You know, so those are the main problems that we have as Africans, and that's what every African should be pointing to. And then after Britain got Nigeria as their own portion, as their own allotment, which they got by force, by military force, Britain now start to fight wars within Nigeria. They start to fight wars. They involve military campaigns to help them to control the resources, secure trade routes like palm oil, and suppress local resistance. Our people resisted, but they were overpowered. Our ancestors resisted them, but they were overpowered. Those are the things that you should know. It is this, our ancestors that resisted them, that we should be praising, that we should be talking about, and not the foreigners, the colonial people that come by force and take away our land. And they also fought a war with the Arochukwu people, the Anglo-Aro War, which lasted between 1901 to 1902, which helped the British to dismantle the Aro Confederacy in eastern Nigeria, aiming to end their control over trade and slave trade. They wanted to end our people's control, Aro's control of trade routes, and they did. They won them. They destroyed the Aro shrine in our own land. They also fought in the Benin Empire. They fought the Benin people. And other wars they fought within Nigeria. That's how they were able to stamp their foot in Nigeria. So those are the areas every African should be pointing to, and not to ourselves. Those are the reason why we are in the situation that we are today. And then what we are saying is that for any African saying that he has ancestral cause from an African person is mistaken. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know history. You are miseducated or misinformed. You have been brainwashed to believe that somebody that puts you in a bad condition is your savior. And you agree in that. It's either that you are poor, you are living in poverty, you are not busy, you don't have a job to do, and you're talking just for talking's sake without reality. The reality is what we have presented to you in this lecture. You are in darkness. You should know that the government you have today is supposed to be solving your problem, because it is a colonial structure and a colonial system answerable to the colonial masters. That's where you should be pointing your finger at, and not to your family members, your community members, your town members who are suffering the same thing that you're suffering out of colonial interventions in our land. And with this, we shall bring into this lecture to an end. Please, if you like this lecture, please share, comment, and like it. And also join us, follow us on YouTube and Facebook, so that anytime we do a new lecture, you'll be able to get it. You can join us in the YouTube by pressing that bell button. Thank you very much, and have a good day. Please share this lecture to other people. Thank you. Bye-bye. We don't have ancestral cause in Africa. What we have that is affecting us is the European ancestral causes, their actions, their activities, forcefully taking our land, forcefully taking our resources, forcefully controlling our trade routes, forcefully colonizing us, forcefully neo-colonizing us, That is what we, all of us, are suffering today. Everybody should stand up to dismantle all these colonial boundaries in our land. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.